Greetings. In this video we are going to start looking at another and the third main subtopic under this topic we are looking at, that is report writing, concentrating particularly on a research report. And the third subtopic is research methods. So in this video, we're going to look at an introduction to research, to the research methods that you may use during your research, and we shall also actually look at how you can actually identify which method to use for your particular research, depending on the type of research that you want to make. So research methods are simply specific procedures for collecting and analyzing data. When you're talking about research methods, they're just procedures that you can use to collect and analyze data. So developing your research methods is an integral part or an important part of your research design. When planning your methods, there are decisions you need to make, and there are two major decisions. The first decision you have to make is you have to decide how you will collect your data. So your methods will depend on what type of data you need to answer your research question. Remember, having developed your research question from the research problem, just as we are going to see in the preceding videos, then from that research question, depending on the data you need to answer that research question, so that it will be that data that you need to answer that research question that will give you the research method you need to use. So for example, there is qualitative and quantitative data. So qualitative data is that data that takes the form of words. Qualitative, it takes the form of words, whereas quantitative data, it takes the form of numbers. Then we also have primary and secondary data. Primary data is that data that is the original data you collect on your own, like the data you collect yourself. You go to the field and you collect the data. That is primary data. Whereas secondary data is data that has already been collected by someone else. Let's say you're using a book. It is already data that was collected by someone, so that is a secondary source, or that is secondary data. Then there is descriptive and experimental. So descriptive data just it will take measurements of something as it is, whereas for experimental data you need to perform an experiment. So just hope you understand the descriptive. Descriptive, if we say, let's say, descriptive research, that is, it is just used to describe characteristics of a population or phenomenon being studied. So if you're taking on descriptive data, it means you're just looking at the characteristics of that thing that you want to study. So it doesn't answer questions about how, when, why the characteristics occurred. Rather, it addresses the what question. What are the characteristics of the population or situation being studied? So something like that. And those characteristics used to describe the situation or population are usually some kind of categorical scheme, also known as descriptive categories. So that is all about descriptive. So descriptive is like, it is just looking at the characteristics of a certain phenomenon, whereas experimental, you need to go and make an experiment. Let's say if it is experimental, let's say there are different experimental research someone could wish to make depending on their fields. So that is those are the different forms of data we have. So for each of those different forms, you will use different methods. So meaning the type of data that you need to answer your research question will determine which research method you will use. So that is the first question you have to ask yourself before you select the research method. So the second question is, you need to decide how you will analyze the data, because normally research contains two main procedures. data collection, and then data analysis. So having decided on what kind of data, or like what kind of data you have, and like which method you use to collect that data, then you need to analyze, to decide how you will analyze that data. So when it comes to the analysis of data, for quantitative data you can use statistical analysis methods to test relationships between variables. That is, you use statistical analysis from statistics. There is that statistical analysis for analyzing quantitative data that takes on numbers, like how the amount of rain that was received in an area. If you're making research about the value, like the change that what has led to the change in the, let's say you're concentrating on rain and you want to study the amounts of rain. So any research that takes on quantitative data, or data that is in the form of numbers, you will need to use you need to use statistical analysis methods. What is challenging me? So anyway, whereas for qualitative data, that is data that takes on the form of words, you can use methods such as the thematics analysis to interpret patterns and meanings in the data. So some of these methods, we shall look at them in as we proceed. Like the thematics data analysis, we shall look at it, but for the statistical data analysis we shall not look at that one. Yeah, because for that one it is for people who have done statistics, who are in that field, they know how to deal with that. So we shall only look at these ones that anyone can use, but for that one you need to have skills in statistics, yeah, in order for you to study those relationships of variations. Sorry, in case like to get the relationships between the different variables in your research. So the other thing we're going to look at are the methods of collecting data. So having looked at and asked yourself those questions, now let's look at the methods of data collection, and we see. So data is just the information that you collect for purpose of answering your research question. So the types of data you need depends on the aim or the aims of your research. So the aims of your research will determine the type of data you need, and then it is the type of data that you need that will determine the method of data collection you will use, and then the type of data analysis you will need. So we have, when you look at methods of data collection, we have qualitative and quantitative data, just as we've said earlier. So your choice of qualitative or quantitative data collection depends on the type of knowledge you want to develop from your research. So for questions about ideas, let's say your research is just to get ideas, experiences, and meanings, or to study something that can't be described numerically, you collect qualitative data. Let's say in your research, the problem you're looking at, you cannot describe it numerically. That is meaning it takes on the word form, or the qualitative form, you get. So in that case you collect qualitative data. If you're looking at something that cannot take on the numerical form, that is that it is not quantitative, it can't be quantified, then you use qualitative data analysis. And if you want to develop a more mechanistic understanding of a topic, or your research involves a hypothesis testing, then you collect quantitative data. That is, if the research you're looking at takes on numerical form, then you collect quantitative data. So it depends on your research question and what you want to achieve. That's how you choose the type of data you have to collect. So you may be asking yourself what hypothesis testing is. Hypothesis testing is just an act in statistics whereby an analyst tests an assumption regarding a population parameter. So hypothesis testing is used to assess the plausibility of a hypothesis by using sample data, or such data may come from a larger population or from a data generating process. So meaning hypothesis testing is if I may illustrate it, is maybe they may need to test a particular assumption. So hypothesis is just a supposition or an assumption taken. But if they want to test this assumption, so if an assumption is made about a particular population, so to test that assumption, it will need a statistical analysis. So in that case, a statistics analyst will have to test that assumption. So that is what they call hypothesis testing. So such forms, they talk on the quantitative form, and they call for quantitative data. Hope I'm clear. Hope I'm clear. And so first of all, when you look at qualitative, the advantages of qualitative data is that it is flexible. You can often adjust your methods as you go to develop new knowledge. And the other advantage is that it can be conducted with small samples. With qualitative, you can use small samples, you can also even adjust the methods as you're proceeding. But the disadvantages of it is that it can't be analyzed using statistical methods, or it can't be even generalized to broader populations, meaning you can't make a small sample and then take it for the general population. No, you can't do that for qualitative data. And then it is also difficult to standardize your research. Then for quantitative data, it has advantages whereby it can be used to systematically describe a large collection of things, and you can also generate reproducible knowledge. So meaning that with quantitative data, you can use it to describe a collection of things. And then the other advantage it has is that it requires statistical training to analyze that kind of data. Not that everyone can analyze it. And then it requires large samples. Like we shall look at sampling when we get there, and then you appreciate this. So for it, because when you're doing research, you have to go into the field. That is, if you take on primary data, you have to go into the field, and you will need to take a lot of samples, or to collect information from very many people if you're collecting it from people from very many sources, in simple terms. So now that is all about quantitative and qualitative data, and the methods you can use for those data types. And then when it comes to primary and secondary data, primary data is any original information that you collect for the purpose of answering your research question. So it is called primary because you collect it from the field, like it is original data. You go in the field and you collect it. You don't use another person's data that they collected sometime back. No, like you can get it through surveys, through observations and experiments. But then secondary data is information that has already been collected by other researchers, for example in government census or previous scientific studies, things of that kind. So if you're exploring a novel research question, you will probably need to collect primary data. But if you want to synthesize existing knowledge, or analyze historical trends, or identify patterns on a large scale, then you can use secondary data. It might be a better choice. So it all depends on your research question. It will help you determine the kind of data you will use. So when it comes to primary data, some of the advantages of primary data is that it can be collected to answer your specific research question, because you collect what you need when you go to the field, and then you have control over the sampling and measurement methods, because it is you carrying out the research. And then disadvantage is that it is more expensive and time consuming to collect, because when it comes to transport, all things you have to fund, they have to be funded financially. So it is more expensive and it takes time, because you have to go to the where you have to go and collect that information. Then the disadvantages are, we've looked at them. It is more expensive. It requires training, data collection methods. You have to be trained in how to collect data. You don't just So that is that is the one of the importances of these videos, to help us gain these skills, such that by the time you're tasked to write or to come up with a research report, you have somewhere to start from. So something like that. Now when it comes to secondary data, the advantage is that it is easy and faster to access, because you just get the book, or if it was some, like, you just get any information source that is related to your topic, and then you just read through, you just study it, and then you get what you want. So it is easy and faster to access, and you can collect. And with this type of data, you can collect data that spans longer time scales and broader geographical locations, because it is easy. Then the disadvantage is that you have no control over how data was generated, because you don't know. You just got someone's data that they collected a long time back, which you don't know how they collected it, you don't know how accurate it was, something like that. But the other disadvantage is that it requires extra processing to make sure it works for your analysis. You need to process it in, like, extra, you need extra processing in order that it can work for you. Now, descriptive and experimental data. So in descriptive research, like in the previous video, we are able to know that descriptive data just aims to describe the characteristics of a population or a phenomenon that is under study. So in a descriptive research, you collect data about your study subject without intervening. So you just take the description, the data that describes its characteristics. So you don't intervene like it is for experimental data, whereby you have to get involved and carry out the experiment. So you systematically intervene in the process and measure the outcome. That is for experimental research. So the validity of your research, that is for descriptive data, the validity of your research, or for descriptive research, the validity of that research will depend on your sampling methods. Whereas the validity of your research, if it is experimental research, it will depend on your experimental design, like how you design to carry out your experiment. So the validity of that experiment will depend on your design. If it is poor, then you have poor results. So to conduct an experiment, you need to be able to vary your independent variables, precisely measure your dependent variables, and control for confounding variables. So all that is scientific language that those people who carry out that stuff use and know how to deal with it. So if it is practically and ethically possible, this method is the best choice for answering questions about cause and effect. So the experimental research is the best one for answering questions that are about causes and effects. It's better you carry out an experiment on that. So descriptive, the advantages of descriptive research is that it allows you to describe your research subject without influencing it. You're not involved in the like, it is not like an experiment whereby you carry out the experiment. So meaning whichever error occurs, you've influenced that error. In this case, you're not influencing anything, so you're just describing your research. And then the other advantage is that it is accessible. You can gather more data on a larger scale. The disadvantage is that you have no control over the confounding variables, and you can't establish causes and effect relationships, because we say descriptive data does not go into that. It just looks at the characteristics. It only answers the what question, the rest it does not. So experimental, the advantage is that with the experimental research, you have more control over your confounding variables, and you can establish the cause and effect relationships. Disadvantage is that you might influence your research subject in unexpected ways. Like, for example, with practicals or experiments, you need to be more careful. Otherwise, you may end up getting something that is completely wrong if you're not accurate. And then usually you require more expertise and resources to collect data for experimental. you require more expertise and resources to collect data. So examples of data collection methods, we're going to look at the examples of data collection methods and where you can use which method. So among the research methods for collecting data, we have experiments for experimental research. So experiment is a primary data collection method. That is, you collect it with an experiment, you collect original data by yourself, and then it is quantitative. With experiments, you deal with numerical figures, you deal with numbers. So meaning, if you are to analyze experimental data, you have to use quantitative methods of data analysis. And then when do we use experiments? We use experiments when we want to test causes and effect relationships. So meaning, this one, I'm putting it this way such that it helps you. If your question, if you want to test causes and effects, then you will know that I have to use experiments or experimental research. If I want to use if I want to test this, then I have to use this type of data method. So that is what we are aiming at in this section when we are looking at the examples of data methods. So survey is an example of data method. It is primary because you go in the field and you collect the data. Surveys, it is primary. Then it is quantitative. It is used to collect quantitative data. So when do we use these ones? We use these ones when we need to understand the general characteristics of a population. That's when you can use this type of data collection. Then we have interviews or focus group. So an interview is a primary method of data collection. It is qualitative. When you use an interview when you need qualitative data. Yeah, data that takes on the form of words. That's when you use an interview. So when do we use interviews? So we use interviews to gain more in-depth understanding of a topic. If there is a certain topic you're looking at and you discover there is some gap, then you can go on and carry out some interviews to get some more or in-depth understanding of that particular topic. Then we have the observation. So the observation is another type of data collection. It is a primary data type, then for which can take on quantitative and qualitative data. It can take on either data types, either quantitative or qualitative. So we use observation data method of collection when we want to understand how something occurs in its natural setting, like you observe and see how something occurs. So that's when we use that method. And then there is the literature review. So literature review is a secondary method of data collection, and it can take on qualitative and quantitative forms. So when do we use this one? We use literature review when we use literature review when we need to situate, when you need to situate your research in an existing body of work or to evaluate trends within a research topic. That's when you use this type of method. Like let's say the research was already made or there is a certain gap, so you come back and make a literature review. So you use it when you want to situate your research in an existing body of work. There is work that already exists, but you think there is something that needs to be improved, or you want to evaluate trends within a research topic. So something like that. Then there is the case study method of data collection. It can either be primary or secondary, and it is either qualitative or quantitative, meaning you can use it to collect primary data or secondary data, and you can use it to either qualitatively or quantitatively, either way. So when do we use this type of data collection? So we use it when we want to gain an in-depth understanding of a specific group or context, or when you don't have the resources for a large study, because normally case study is used when you want to narrow down. For example, let's say you want to make a research about the behaviors of employees in organizations in Uganda. So the large group would be the whole organizations in Uganda, but you can't do that. It would be quite expensive and time consuming. So you can just focus on a certain organization and you take that as your case study and you make research in that organization. So in that case, you're looking to understand that the specific, are you looking to gain an in-depth understanding of a specific group or context, but you don't need to have, or you don't have the resources for a large study normally. So now those are the different methods of data collection and when you can use them. There are quantitative data collections, qualitative, primary and secondary, descriptive and experimental. Those are the different methods of data collection. So each of them is applicable in a certain area. So meaning it will depend, like I've been showing you, where each of them will work. So it depends on your research question. Knowing where research question falls, then you know which particular type of data collection method you will need to use. Now, having seen in the beginning of this subtopic of methods of data collection, we said when you are looking at this topic of research methods, we're in position to see that research methods take on data collection, or research involves data collection and data analysis. So having looked at the methods of data collection, so we are going to look at the methods of data analysis. We are going to look at them briefly, and then from those we shall get those ones we shall concentrate on, like I said in the previous video. So the methods of analyzing data, your data analysis methods will depend on the anyway, I think for this video let's stop it here. Because we can't proceed to methods of data analysis. We shall do that in another separate video. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned and subscribe if you've not yet subscribed. Thank you.